Please join me once again in welcoming him. Thank you. May I invite Ambassador for introductory remarks, sir?
Honorable Minister, members of Indian diaspora, my colleagues from Ministry, it's a privilege to welcome Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Shankar in Stockholm. The visit is special as it comes during a landmark year, marking 75 years of diplomatic relations with Sweden. His visit comes at an important time when India and Sweden have assumed significant responsibilities in chairing two of the most influential groupings, the G20 and the EU, at a time of serious global and regional challenges. Our partnership is intensifying. In the last few months alone, there have been nearly 10 ministerial interactions, including twice between the foreign ministers, and one of them was earlier today. The contribution of the significant Indian diaspora to the Swedish economy is well recognized and appreciated by the Swedish leaders. The last 8 to 10 years have seen a rapid increase in the number of Indian professionals and engineers working for the Swedish and Indian companies across Sweden. Sweden is keen to attract more Indian talent for the cutting-edge technology ventures in green industrial and digital transition. Today, we are happy to welcome members of the Indian diaspora, not only from Stockholm, but also from cities like Luleå, which is located 150 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle and 900 kilometers from here, and from Gothenburg and Malmö in the south, around 600 kilometers from Stockholm. They've also come from many other cities, including Umeå, Blekinge, Västerås, Helsingborg, Älmhult, Uppsala, and Dalarna region. Many of you have spent decades here, and others are more recent arrivals. There are many researchers and students from leading Swedish universities, including KTH, Karolinska, and Chalmers. One can hear many Indian languages on the Swedish streets now. Yoga and colors of Indian festivals, songs and dances are enthusiastically received across Swedish cities. The Swedish Minister of Foreign Trade recently expressed his wonder of how the Indian festival, the Namaste Stockholm, filled the central square in Stockholm with Swedes. It is great to welcome all of you today, and may I now request the Honorable Minister to address the audience on this occasion.
Ambassador, dear friends, let me begin by saying that it's really very good feeling to see all of you. I thank you for making time on a Sunday and spending it with me. It's really, for me, a very important, I would say, essential part of my visit. As the Ambassador mentioned, I am here at a time when India and Sweden mark 75 years of their diplomatic relations. We first established those relations in 1948. It was the first Nordic country with which we had relations. I'm also here because we had yesterday something called the European Union Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum. As you know, Sweden is currently holding the presidency of the European Union, and this forum, how European Union engages with the Indo-Pacific and in that context with India. This was something which started last year. It began in France. This was the second edition, so it was my privilege yesterday to deliver the keynote address for that meeting. We had, I think, close to about 75, 80 countries there. That, as well as I said, the 75th anniversary of our bilateral relations, these were the immediate reasons for my presence. Since yesterday afternoon when I arrived, I met the foreign minister, I met the defense minister, a number of other European ministers who are here. And tomorrow, before I leave, I will call on the Prime Minister, meet the National Security Advisor, meet with the Swedish business community. This, I thought, is something I should share with all of you. While it is, yes, it is certainly an important anniversary, but it also happens that on this anniversary, Sweden holds the presidency of the EU and we hold the presidency of the G20. And that, I would say, responsibility, the intersection of those responsibilities is something which is important for the world. And the fact that we, as two countries who have historically very good relations, very close relations, by our coming together, it's not just that we are, in a sense, benefiting each other, but there is a larger gain to the world because of the responsibilities that we hold at this time. Now, all of you live here. I mean, in a sense, your very presence, your daily life is an affirmation of the relationship between our two countries. But still sometimes it is good to remind people who are themselves so much in the midst of a relationship what the relationship is about. Because in a sense, we take a lot of things for granted. We ourselves may be part of a process and may not be entirely aware of the enormity of it or the significance of it. And I want to say that, for us, Sweden has historically been an important partner. It has been an important partner when it comes to political relations, certainly. We had Prime Minister Modi here in 2018. It's also been an important partner in terms of the larger Nordic grouping. In fact, at that time we started some, a group engagement with the Nordic Five, which the second edition of it we did in Copenhagen last year. And of course, from the Swedish side, we were privileged to receive His Majesty a few years ago. I think I can see a picture somewhere there. When I say that political relations are good, in practical terms, what it actually means is, it could be the United Nations, it could be other international organizations. We tend to think along similar lines. We work together on important issues. We support each other. And some of that, for example, we can see in important initiatives, like there is an initiative that India and Sweden are co-leading on industrial transitions. This was something which Prime Minister Modi himself started with his Swedish counterpart then in 2019. So when it comes to issues like climate action, when it comes to issues even of development, because again, Sweden has a well-earned reputation in Europe as a country which has always been very sympathetic to what we call the global south, the developing world. So that political comfort has always been with Sweden, and visits like mine or that of my counterpart a few months ago to India, these do help to take that forward. But it's also exhibited in many ways where business is concerned. And that is something I think many of you here would know better than me. We have today almost 300 Swedish companies who have a presence in India. We have a growing number of Indian companies here. Now, we could, of course, say that 300 is not a good enough number today given the growth rate in India, but certainly my approach is to build on what is actually more than a century-old tradition of a business presence in India. You know, there are companies like Ericsson or Swedish Match or SKF who have that kind of history doing business. And I certainly hope that in turn, our businesses here too are able to scale up their presence and set up the kind of collaborations which would make us an important player. We have, of course, when I speak about a good tradition, now, we are saying 75 years, I refer to 1948, but the fact is, in many ways, the relationship is very much older. And this morning, I had some time on my hands. I went to the Nobel Museum. It was a reminder there, of course, one, to see the various, displays regarding Indian Nobel laureates. But this is a land where, someone like Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore came more than 100 years ago. But the traditions go back much older. Yesterday, in fact, at the Indo-Pacific Ministerial Dinner, Foreign Minister Billstrom reminded us, I believe there's a very famous Buddhist statuette which is evidence of the fact that there's been a trade and a civilizational linkage for many, many years. So I cite all this because, as I say, this is a strong relationship. It's a relationship whose very steady growth, whose very solid foundation today offers us many possibilities. So, with those words, I want to share with you where we feel India-Sweden relations fit into, I would say, India's own growth journey. One, of course, as a very crucial member of the European Union, do appreciate that for India, when we look at key international partners, the European Union certainly is among the top partners. So, among the top partners, a particularly influential country obviously has its own significance, and at a time when we are engaged with the European Union, we are negotiating a free trade agreement, we are negotiating an investment agreement, we are actually intensifying our technology cooperation. My own plans after tomorrow is to go from here to Brussels for what is the first meeting of something called Trade and Technology Council. So the role, the weight of the influence of Sweden in the European Union is something which is of great value. The second, within the European Union, within Europe, there are very distinct, I would say, groupings or regions or sub-regions, you could say. And here the Nordic-Baltic grouping is one of great importance. And in fact, when I look back at the last decade, among the many innovations which Prime Minister Modi has introduced in our foreign policy, this kind of group engagement with countries is one of them. We've done it we had a tradition of doing it with Africa, but we're doing it with the Pacific Islands, we're doing it in other regions in South America, but in Europe, the Nordic one is particularly important, and in the coming years we hope in some way to also try to capture the Baltic countries in association with that. The second is when I look at the kind of challenges that India would confront in its own growth and development. Again, Sweden and its capabilities and its strengths fit in very strongly with that, because when we grew, we will not have the I would say luxury or the kind of freedoms to grow in the manner in which other countries did 20 years ago or earlier. This is an era where climate sensitivity will be very strong. So our growth must necessarily, and I don't say this as a compulsion, I think our growth should, out of choice, be much greener, much friendlier, much softer on the planet. And when we look at that kind of, I would say, growth characteristic, here a country like Sweden, again, the technologies and the practices and the experiences of Sweden will surely stand us in very good stead. Another area where, again, there are very strong possibilities of further collaboration, of course, is the digital domain. Here again, there is a history. I mean, there are tech companies here, telecom companies here, where Sweden has established a reputation for itself, and certainly we in India see our growth as very much more digital than previous growths of major economies. So if you think of a world where, let us say, the next decade, in fact not decade, but 2 or 3 decades, and India grows, which is an India that is today the fifth largest economy. But this India is growing in much greener circumstances, in much more digital ways, much more intensively by use of technology. I think you can actually see that there is a fit here with Sweden. It's important that we explore those opportunities, and certainly in interactions with business, that is something which would be very much a focus bit. A third area, and again this is something all of you would empathize with, is that of the world as a global workplace. What is very clear is with each passing year, the demographics of the world is beginning to assert itself. And the demographics of the world is beginning to assert itself along with the demand for talents and skills. So, put very simply, where there is today demand is not necessarily where there is demographics. So, how the global economy actually deals with this gap, this is actually one of the big issues. And it's an issue because it's not just a demand-supply evening out issue. There are cultural issues here. There are mobility concerns. There is a question of, when large numbers of people move in one direction or the other. These need to be managed, and there needs to be the right framework, there need to be the right policies. But the fact is, we are seeing increasingly in Europe the openness today to look at the skills and talents of India. And one aspect of it, you could say, is yes, there is a demand. But one aspect of it equally is that Indians have established a global reputation. That Indian talent, when it goes outside, is able to fit in with the environment, with the work culture of other places. It may interest some of you to know, just yesterday, I actually concluded an agreement with Austria for mobility and migration. So it finalizes a regime by which Indians working in Austria get the treatment which they are entitled to, get the facilities and the protection which our people deserve. And we had done it. I had concluded a similar agreement last December with Germany. So this is a trend that we see happening. Certainly my hope would be that, in due course, we will see this particular aspect of our relationship with Sweden also advance. As I said, when it comes to conducting international relations, doing diplomacy. In a wide variety of areas, there's a great deal of ease of working with Sweden. In fact, when I look at a forum like the United Nations, we have now for many years a tradition, sometimes of moving resolutions in partnership with each other. There is in fact something called a humanitarian joint resolution, which we take turns moving, and this is one of the many convergences that we have. So I thought, as Indians who live here, or whether you're still of Indian nationality or you are settled in Sweden, you are all stakeholders in this relationship. It's important you know the developments in the relationship, the progress, the prospects of this relationship. So it's actually a very, I would say, a hopeful, positive picture that I'm presenting to you. I'm very confident that almost by any metric, this relationship will grow rapidly in the years to come. Now, having spoken about the relationship, it's also natural, when an Indian minister comes out and meets the community, that there is a desire to know what is happening at home. And I thought perhaps, my sense of that is also something which you will find of interest. And I would briefly again give you a kind of a domestic picture in India. It's a picture again, because I'm a foreign minister, I travel a lot, I look at other countries. So to some extent, what I say is a very comparative judgment of India and India before, but of India and other countries at this time. The last few years have been difficult for everybody. They've been difficult for everybody largely because of the COVID pandemic. No country, no society, I would say no family, probably no person, individual person has escaped the impact of it. It's only a question of how intense it has been, but it has, no question, probably been the most traumatic experience of our lifetimes. So when they call it a once-in-a-century happening, I mean, it's truly that. And when we look around the world, it has been difficult for many societies to recover from this. Difficult in terms of, the emotional trauma, the social consequences of it, the economic damage that has been done, the health issues that have arisen. So today, that is actually a big overhang on the world. And when I look at India today, I have to very objectively really conclude that, relatively speaking, actually we have dealt with it in very effective terms. That yes, I don't know how many of you were able to visit India in the last few years, but even those of you who weren't in the more difficult waves that we had, you would have watched with concern. You would have had friends and family out there. Their welfare would have also been a factor in your mind. But the ability in India to respond to the challenges of the COVID, to create a public health response, to execute a vaccination program on such a large scale, to deal with the economic consequences, particularly on the informal sector, and then stage an economic recovery. This is something I think it's very important for Indians and the Indian community abroad to appreciate. Because in all honesty, not every country in the world can say this. There are still countries who are reeling from the effects of COVID. There were countries who really struggled with vaccination. There were people whose economic situation has become very precarious, in part because of the COVID, and you can see that even very close in our own neighborhood. So, if I were to today really assess the post-COVID recovery and I would say the psychological recovery for a society as well as the economic recovery, I think what is happening in India is very commendable, and it is actually a tribute to the resilience of our people. It is also in many ways a period when we have discovered that we are capable of really rising to a challenge. That if you look in terms of our contribution, as foreign minister, I have for me perhaps the largest source of goodwill in the world today is the fact that during COVID, when first we were big suppliers of medicines, but thereafter very big suppliers of vaccines. There are a very large number of countries where probably the first vaccines that they ever got from anybody was from India. And there are 100 countries today in the world almost who could say that. And I can tell you that it's had a very, very profound impact on our global image. The second big change in India is actually with regard to digital delivery. Digital delivery, in the sense, I'm sure everybody has an Aadhaar card. I certainly hope everybody has an Aadhaar card. But when it started, very few of us actually understood where this was going to take us. In fact, there's an interesting book. We put together a book. This was 2022, which was called Modi at 20. The purpose of the book was really, Prime Minister Modi had done 20 years in administration, elected as Chief Minister and as Prime Minister. So somebody came up with the idea that people who had been associated with him over these 20 years, who had observed him from different perspectives, who had met him, why don't we get a diverse set of people to pen their views? So I had the good fortune of being among them, but it was a very interesting, I would say, very eclectic collection of people. So it had, sports stars like P.V. Sindhu. It had somebody like Sudha Murthy or Nandan Nilekani. Very few people from the government. So believe me, it's really worth reading. So now I mention that because in that Nandan Nilekani has a very interesting story. He says he's now talking. I'd say 15 years ago maybe, and he went around India and he said, I met all the chief ministers of India and tried to communicate to them what was the potential of Aadhaar, what you could do with Aadhaar. And he said the one person who got it then was Narendra Modi. He said, he gave it full attention, he really spent a lot of time. From the questions, the level of engagement, he understood even at that time what we could do in terms of digital delivery. And today, on the ground, I must tell you, it's actually been remarkable. It's been remarkable because if you look, we've had programs and schemes of various kinds. It's part of governance, it's part of development. But the same scheme, once it is, in a sense, put on a digital backbone, where there is a direct ability to give the benefit, to monitor the benefit, to ensure that it reaches the set of people it is meant for, the digital mode allows you to scale it up in a way in which it is unimaginable. And I go back to this COVID period, because when COVID happened, one of our big concerns was, quite apart from the health aspect of the COVID, at that time, do remember we're talking maybe first quarter of 2020. First quarter of 2020, there were no COVID centers. We were running around the world trying to buy masks. PPEs were actually, nobody had even, or very few people other than in the medical field had even heard of PPEs or understood the importance of ventilators. Now, in all of this, there was also this concern that if you have a lockdown, if the informal sector is affected, if people are going back to the homes, what happens to them? How do you finance them? How do you feed them? How do you look after them? And one of our cabinet meetings, in fact, Prime Minister was very clear. He told all of us, go and study the Spanish flu. That if you see the Spanish flu, which happened about 100 years before COVID, a lot of people actually died not of the flu, but of the of the famine, of the shortages which accompanied a pandemic. And that he was absolutely determined he would not allow. So the COVID in many ways actually spurred the stress period of the COVID, actually encouraged us to sort of push digital in a way in which perhaps would not have been in our own minds, we would not have done it in the way in which we did. And the results today, because again, it was not something, the decisions were taken then, but there were a lot of preparation which had happened before. In fact, when in 2014, 15, 16, the first few years when Mr. Modi was Prime Minister, you will recall he pressed people saying, go open a bank account. Now, to a lot of people, it seemed a very inexplicable sort of push from the Prime Minister. I mean, he was actually telling people, even if you don't have money, go open a bank account. Now, that bank account, that validated by the digitalization, but the fact that we have digital identities, actually enabled us to set up a financial support system, a food support system, and which actually was at the heart of seeing us through the COVID. That when 1/3 of the country, 400 million people, were actually receiving regular payments from the government through this COVID period, when probably 2/3 of the country was getting food. This is really, in many ways, what saw us through the most acute stress period. But it's not just, I would say, a reflex response to a difficult situation. It's also, as I said, a way today of creating, you are living in Sweden, in a country which is famed for its social safety net. When in the 1970s and 80s, if you spoke in the world, which country has really created a society which has the ability to look after people, Sweden would have been a name which would come very naturally to people's minds. Now, traditionally, people thought that it's only high-income societies which can do this. So you are at 50,000 euros per capita, yes, you can create a social safety net. Today, at $2,500 per capita, we are on our way. Yes, maybe not with that degree or that level of social safety, but the idea that there is universal health coverage, that there is mass housing, that there is universal pension, that farmers get support for their crop production, and each of these schemes, when you look at the kind of impact it is making. The numbers are, 80 million here, 400 million here, 800 million there. This is in a way a very big change. And that change is having an impact on the population. Because, again, as a political person, when I travel around, I see on the ground not only the benefits of this, I also see how much, the levels of confidence, the almost, I would say, also the legitimate expectation from people that yes, you are a government, yes, we expect this, this is what really, we elected you to do. And that's actually having an enormous impact on the national mood. Along with that, there is another very important development which we call Gati Shakti. And Gati Shakti is again on an issue which, all Indians, we've long complained about, which is we go around the world and say, their infrastructure is better than ours. Why aren't the roads working like this? Why doesn't the railway train run like this? Why doesn't the airport, why isn't our airport as good as theirs? And that's changing. In fact, I often, when I travel, I make comparisons, but those comparisons now are less favorable to the places I travel to than about what is happening in India. And it's actually not just building infrastructure. It is about doing all of this in a planned, coordinated way. Because often one of our weaknesses was, whoever was building the road, rail, airport, metro, electricity, each person was doing it very, very independently. And so in terms of efficiency of resources also, it wasn't the best way of doing it. So there is today, any of you going back to India, I guarantee you, whichever place you are from the point of landing to the place where you live, the one constant you will see is that there's an infrastructure activity which is taking place. And that pace of that, the impact of that, I go to the same place which I went 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And this is despite 2 years of COVID. That despite that, if you go back to your hometown or your home village or some place you are familiar with, and for sure you will see that change taking place. So at home, the kind of picture which I would present to you, again, I'm not in any way minimizing the challenges. We do have them. It is very important. We grow. We grow inclusively. How do you create the employment opportunities? The fact that if you have a young you reap a demographic dividend only if there are opportunities for the demographics to contribute, and most of all in employment. So all of that is there. But I think it's important today that you all appreciate living here in Sweden, that the national mood is a confident mood. We will have, of course, it's natural, we are a democratic country, we will have our debates, we will have our differences. There will be, all that people, in my walk of life do in politics. But the fact is, when you step back and look at India and, compare India to the India before, compare India to what is happening in other parts of the world, I would say to you, that there is today that confidence that we are on a sort of upward trajectory. It's not just I would say an elite confidence or a political confidence. I think it is there. Again, to me, one of the most remarkable shifts which I've seen is how deep, today the awareness is, how connected people are. That I am a member of parliament from the state of Gujarat, and I travel in Gujarat particularly to areas where I have developmental responsibilities. And a lot of these are actually, relatively, today we call them aspirational districts. These are areas which historically were not very well developed, many of them are tribal areas. But you go there today and see what that the power of the awareness generated by the phone, the communication, what it has done to people's psyche. There's really actually a kind of a revolution that is taking place. So that I thought were some impressions I should share with you. And finally, let me just conclude with one observation, which is, we are evolving, we are growing. As I said, we will have our debates. I mean, that's how societies progress. But it's important that our partners, our particularly important partners, have a good understanding of India. And countries develop understandings of other societies largely through their individual experiences. That if somebody in Sweden thinks about India, it's not, yes, certainly what they read in a newspaper or see in a television or look at social media, all these matter. But a lot of it is actually individual experiences. They relate a country, a partner, to a person. For them, their direct experiences, really in many ways determine their goodwill or otherwise towards a country. So for us today, the importance of the diaspora, of the Indian community, is in many ways my job is made not just easier. In many ways, you are all part of, helping me or sharing with me or partnering me in actually projecting the image of India, the personality of India. And it's through your activities and your achievements and your successes that we build these relationships. So I say this to you not as a formality. I do think that India owes a big debt to the Indian diaspora for actually helping to enhance our profile in the world, and I think it's only appropriate that I should express that also to you. So perhaps on that note, I will stop. And Ambassador, how would you like,
So thank you very much, sir, for that very insightful personal impressions and perspective on what is going on in the India-Sweden context and also in domestic context. Honorable Minister has agreed to take a few questions. So if you have some questions that you would wish to ask the Honorable Minister, please raise your hands, briefly introduce yourself, and if you could keep the questions short. Okay.
I'm Shilpa Subanna. I've been following you greatly. Like a fanboy, I follow you. I'm addicted to the videos. One thing very impressive about you is you follow yourself so calm and composed. You handle extreme, subtle but yet strong, witty yet very politically correct. So how do you do it, Sarah? Is it...
Yeah.
Is it, it's not a skill that can be learned, or it's a lifestyle or yoga, meditation? What is it, sir?
No. Well, look, to be honest, I think it's not that I don't get excitable. It is not that, we're all human, okay? And it depends. There are issues which can get me going, I assure you. But by and large, if you have a lifetime of actually interacting with people, of explaining to people, and perhaps, some of it may be diplomatic training, you could say, which is, don't let them provoke you, don't let them push you, So I would say maybe part instinct, part experience. But again, look, what I would say this as an example. Today we are becoming, we're becoming bigger in India. Okay, we are the 5th largest economy. Our weight, our influence, our reach, our opinions, all this count for more. Now, when that happens, it's not always that everybody would embrace it warmly. People will contest it. There will be, you can have people who may feel, this country or this person, in the past they always listened to us. Now why are they behaving differently? I mean, they could have that. So the rise of any country is always a challenge. And when you are challenged, you have to handle it in a way in which you respond, but you don't necessarily get provoked. I think that's the fine line. So I try my best. Occasionally, maybe, but I try my best.
No, sir, you do excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nalini Bonnier. I'm a managing director at a global investment bank here in Sweden. It's called BNP Paribas. And by chance, I'm actually also the first Indian girl who came to Sweden at the age of 2 and who's still living here. So I came here in 1964 with my parents. My father was a nuclear physicist. He came here on a research scholarship, and he became a Swedish representative to the International Research Center CERN in Geneva as an Indian citizen. So my question to you is, how do you see the future of the UN Security Council, given the challenges in maintaining peace? And do you also see a potential for India to become a permanent member, given that India is the most populous nation in the world? Thank you.
Ambassador, if I may make a suggestion, could I take about 3-4 questions, then everybody will get a chance? Yeah.
I'll come to this side. Maybe.
Hello, sir. I'm a big fan of you. First, I should say that. Thank you so much for honoring us being here. My question is, sir, the geopolitical situation and the political clout right now is changing. And as you can understand, Sweden, which has been a peace-loving country and has a big history like India, now NATO has come in and there is a lot of things changing due to the geopolitical situation. So as Honorable External Affairs Minister for India right now, what is the biggest challenge you see when it comes to the geopolitical situation right now? Considering NATO and the war that's going on, what is the big challenge that we are facing? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Somebody from... Yeah, Richard. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, I'm Omkar from Chalmers, representing the Indian group from Chalmers. I would like to make 2 points. First of all, you're such a great speaker. The way you answer the questions is really good. And the second thing is, we all know that next year we have the central elections coming up. And the awareness among the Indians abroad that we can cast a vote from here is very less. So can something be made wherein we have been made more aware about we can register for Form 6 and cast a vote from here, which would be really good for us. And the second thing being, I see that there's a lot of collaboration between automotive companies such as the Volvo Trucks and GKN from Sweden and back in India. And being a student in the aerospace sector, can we hope something happening in the near future wherein electric aviation, which is happening very good here, can we see some collaboration taking place in India as well in the future? Thank you.
I'll take one more.
One more from this side. Yeah.
Hello. So my name is Peter, and first of all, thank you, Shri Dr. Jaishankar, for coming to Sweden, and it's such a great pleasure to have a foreign minister from such a big country like India here. So my question is that since India is already the most populous country in the world, it was also probably also have the highest GDP in the world and surpassing countries such as USA and much of the West. So my question to you is, do you think also that the Indian culture will become more prominent in the West? That, for example, in the future, when we think of fast food, we think of pani puri instead of hamburger. That radios here would start to play Bollywood music, and that H&M T-shirts would have New Delhi printed on instead of New York. Thank you, sir.
Let me start with the UN Security Council question. The UN, I think everybody will remember, was designed in the 1940s. At a time when, though India was an original signatory to the Charter, but India was not an independent country. And at that time, the 5 countries who are still today permanent members of the Security Council, they kind of selected themselves, you could say. Now, the problem today is, like any institution, those who are previous beneficiaries are resistant to that change, which they feel would in some way dilute their positions of privilege. Now, some of them may be more so, some of them less so. I think the wiser ones will say, okay, life is changing, let me change with it. It's useful for us to have a country like India. There would be others who may not oppose us openly, but effectively through their actions and policy ensure that the status quo is maintained. For almost now 20 years, there has been a persistent effort to find a way of reforming the UN. And there are today 190 something countries who are members of the UN. Now you would imagine, you can ask yourself, how hard can it be? Okay, if there are 190 countries, why don't they all sit in a room and sit down and thrash it out? But as Ambassador would tell you, he's worked in the United Nations. What happens is, the obstructions and the maneuvers begin. So even sitting in the room to discuss it itself is a challenge, So this, quite honestly, is one. It's not just a challenge for India, because the fact is there is today no African country as a permanent member. There is no Latin American country. So what happens is, if you have any large body, it could be body of nations, body of people, if the leadership, the decision making is not representative of the membership. So it's like a shareholding. If the shareholders of a company feel that the company management is not representative of the shareholding, you're going to have problems. Now, at this time, you can actually see that with each passing year, the effectiveness of the UN has actually come under question. So, even for the good of the UN, it is. So, I'm not even taking an Indian viewpoint. I would say globally, fairness, effectiveness would dictate that there is reform. For the good of the UN, there should be reform. But, it will be a kind of a tussle between the reformists and those who are obstructionists. But I'm very confident that, look, with each passing year, I've seen, the sentiment for reform grow stronger. So when it will happen, I can't say. But I can say the needle is moving in the direction of reform. That I can certainly accept. Regarding the geopolitical challenge issue, look, how the world looks depends in many ways where you look at it. I can imagine today, I've seen in the last yesterday, today, the people I met. I mean, here, obviously, right now, the Ukraine conflict is the most important event. It's understandable because it's a very proximate region. Now, if you go, let us say, to Asia or to Latin America, I was there 2 weeks ago, it's not like they are unaware of the seriousness of it. It is that it's manifested in their lives in a very different way. So if you ask, say in Africa today, what is it which is really like you consider the life and death issue? People will tell you, look, debt is a big issue. We don't have the money to do education, health. We are actually cutting back in many ways. Far from progressing, we are actually in some ways regressing. There will be places where, even the Ukraine conflict has expressed itself in food shortage. A large part of Africa, Middle East was actually importing food, and their food chains have been disrupted. There are countries who have found that their energy bills have shot up, and in some ways it's become unaffordable for a country. There would be places where actually people will say, fertilizer supply, because remember, Russia is one of the biggest, probably the biggest exporter of fertilizer, that has been affected. So one part of it is we are today in a very globalized existence, and a disruptive event somewhere will actually not just affect that immediate region. That would have happened 25 years ago. Distant parts would not have felt it the way that they are doing today. Now, once you accept that, I would say look at the disruptions across, what could be the source of disruptions. We spoke about COVID. Think how much COVID actually disrupted the world. Not only by the health consequences of COVID, the economic consequences, the mobility consequences, the supply chain consequences. I mean, during the lockdown, when we had the lockdown in 2020, one of the regions which was very, very anxious at the time of lockdown was actually the Gulf, because most of us don't readily realize it. Every day, there is food shipment moving out of India to the Gulf. They are heavily dependent on us for actually the food supplies. So they were very worried that actually the flow of food would get disrupted. And we actually made an exceptional effort at that time to ensure that it didn't happen. So one part of it, as I said, is this whole set of disruptive events. It could be pandemic, it could be climate events. I mean, again, we think of global warming, but look at the regularity and the growing intensity of climate events. That climate events are getting stronger, more catastrophic in their consequences, and they will be disruptive as well. You had countries where there are massive floods, enormous heat waves, right? Big cyclones. We're seeing one right now near Bangladesh. And if you measure them against how it happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, no question that they're all getting much more severe. So this kind of disruptive is one issue. We don't think of it as geopolitical, but it is actually. The second is the nature today of the global economy, that if production is not dispersed, that if there's a concentration in one area, it's actually a big risk. It could be a risk from any of these disruptive factors. The third is technology. That again, technology is seen by people as neutral. Technology is actually very, very strategic. That we are moving to a world. There are a lot of you demographically or professionally would know very much more about it than I do. We are moving into actually a world where data, artificial intelligence, these are actually going to be the new expressions of power. So I think a part of what is happening in my profession is we are at a cusp where there is a kind of a I would say the factors, there's a change almost in the manner in which we contemplate our profession. That how do nations, what is the competition between nations, who is powerful, who is less powerful, who is influential, how do they become so, all that is today changing. Regarding your points, I think it's a very valid point. And on the bit you mentioned about the election, but on the aviation, look, in India, again, we are today encouraging private sector growth, not just in defense, in different aspects of aviation, including civil aviation. And you are actually seeing some very interesting developments that there are private companies today who are confident enough and who got the contracts to actually try and make aircraft in India. My sense is actually India could be poised, because I still use that word because I think we are setting in place the policies. We now have to make sure we get that kind of international traction. We could be poised to actually emerge as a major manufacturing hub. And not just as a manufacturing hub, but a geography where a large part of the world trusts us. Because that's a very important word today in business and in technology, that you need trusted partners. You need, and it's not so much an IP issue. It's a trust because the application of that technology and how you deploy it is today a matter of great sensitivity. I think today India can emerge as a hub for trusted technology development. It can be really a center for expanded design engineering. Indian businesses, I think, are kind of poised today to grow in areas where previously they have been very hesitant. And I think there are opportunities here, and it's important, as I said, that Indians who have a specialization, who have some knowledge of this, explain that to people in Sweden. Because often people's image of us may be 5 years old, 10 years old, and believe me, a lot of things are changing. So it would be very helpful if people like you spread the word. These are the changes which are happening in India. The question about the observations about Indian culture. I don't know if you follow Hindi. But there is a term which says "Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar." So the meaning, we very sort of welcome in many ways what you say. May it come true, But I actually can see this globalization of Indian culture happening. And it's happening for a variety of factors. One, of course, is because, of the spread of the diaspora. The second is we ourselves, I think, are much more confidently expressing it. It's important we try to find ways of making it more universal. And one very good example of that is actually this initiative which started in 2015 of celebrating the International Day of Yoga. When the idea first started, Prime Minister spoke about it in September of 2014. He had come to the US at that time. I must say, in all honesty, none of us actually could even imagine it would catch on the way it does now. There is not a country in the world where that enthusiasm for yoga is not there. Perhaps it was there, it may have been dormant, we may have done something to awaken it and take it to a new level. But there are other areas, it could be music, it could be cinema, the power of culture. And I think that's the strength of India. It's a strength of India which we have not brought into play in the manner in which we should. And I hope people like you, if you can be so enthusiastic, I'm sure everybody else will join you in that regard. I'll take one more. I'll take one round more. One round. Four questions.
So I'm Dr. Sanjeevi. I'm also Pravasi Bharasya Samman Awardee. I've been in Sweden now for 33 years. My question is about China. China is one of the biggest trading partners for India. But at the same time, we are being pressured by China in all sides. One, by taking all the countries surrounding India into a debt trap. That's one thing. Second, all the terrorists that India want to identify are all being blocked at the United Nations by China from being named as terrorists. So there is a past, there is a present, and we are talking about climate wars that are going to happen in the future, where one can manipulate the clouds from not bringing the rain and resulting in some of the desertification and things like that. So with so much happening, it's extremely tough job, I think, for you to deal with China in balancing the trade on one side and also increasing the security for India on the other side. How do you envision that we will move forward with China in the future?
Okay.
Anybody from this side?
Hi. We have the same alma mater. My name is Samir Kalra. I studied at AFCS, so we're really proud of what you do for the school.
Right.
Fantastic, absolutely.
Thank you.
On behalf of everyone who is passed out from the school. I head the marine division of Alfa Laval, one of the 300 companies you alluded to in your talk. And my question to you is, you mentioned climate a couple of times, maybe more than that during your interaction today. But if you see India's ambition around net zero, it significantly lacks the global ambition in terms of where we would like to be. And you also mentioned the fact that our growth will be greener down the line. We hear about what we are doing around hydrogens and stuff like that. But do you see a risk that if we are not a bit more ambitious on our target around climate, in terms of the technology development, we may actually be left behind in the process? And climate is a global it's something that impacts all of us, so it's not the emissions only come up in India.
Thank you. Somebody from this side. Richard.
Hello, sir. My name is Kaushik. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Sweden. Really appreciate this and the honor of being in here in this presence. I'm born in Gujarat. I've been living in Sweden for 43 years now. So I'm brought up here. Mm-hmm. I'm like one of those 50-50 people. When I'm in Sweden, I feel Indian, and when I go to India, I feel Swedish. So I don't have any...
But you feel Gujarati all the time.
I am Gujarati all the way. Tepla, kakra, you name it. So I actually don't have a question. I just want to say big thanks. Because when I grew up in Sweden, when we grew up, we saw... Being Indian, we were always looked upon as some sort of a third-class people, frankly speaking. I mean, I've seen this, I've felt it from inside. You know that? They see us as lower-standing people, like undeveloped and maybe uneducated at times, poor. But then I've seen the shift throughout. And maybe it happens as well because I have grown myself, got an education, I'm stronger, I see how I work, but I've seen how the Indian government has done this, the old governments, I'm not saying only this government, but previously. And I'm really thankful, and I just want to say big thanks for this, because we are so proud now to be Indians in these contexts, So just want to say big thanks for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more.
This one? Yeah. Yeah.
Hello. So here I'm not going to take about some political questions or something, but as a representative of youths from India and as well as in Sweden, came here to study my master's and now working here for 3 years now. So what would be your advice or thoughts where us youngsters representing India and also working in Europe would like to have a mindset in terms of future taking India as being as a rep from India and also continuing the growth towards Europe. So how would you like to motivate or give us some advice?
Sure. Let me start with the China question. You see, why today does India, not only India, but India imports so much from China? In part, I would argue because when we embarked on reform in 1991-92, we opened up our economy. We should have done that. I mean, nobody today disputes that reform was necessary. But what we did not do at that time and the succeeding years was the way in which, let us say, China or a Japan or a Korea built up their industry. We did not give that kind of encouragement and support to manufacturing in India. Now, what it did was, it actually put Indian industry, especially small industry, very much at disadvantage. Because on the one hand, we were exposing them to the world, but we were exposing them to economies where, in a sense, there are a lot of non-market factors, subsidies at play. The scale was very different. And so if you look back at the last 3 decades, actually, this has been a very persistent complaint in the Indian business community, especially the small business community. So how today to motivate and encourage revival of manufacturing? This is something which is very important, because if our own businesses, if they prefer to source from China rather than from Indian companies, how does the chain get built? Now, you will not see that, say, in East Asia. Japanese companies will source from Japanese companies. Korean companies will source from Korean companies. So, a large, some of it is like the economic factors. Some of it is making infrastructure. I mean, one of the reasons why we are making this big push in infrastructure is, if our infrastructure is not competitive, our economy cannot be competitive, because it's not only convenience of people, you are actually disadvantaging production in India with an inefficient infrastructure. So there are a whole set of changes which need to be done to encourage manufacturing. But we've had, debates in India. Frankly, I don't want to be political abroad, but we have not always seen consistent support for industry and for manufacturing in India. But there is also the motivational factor. Today, if you look at the messaging of the Prime Minister, when he keeps saying Atmanirbhar Bharat, when he says vocal for local, when he tells us, look, go buy, make in India, give preference to make in India. Even when it comes to even the government of India was often not treating Indian industry as the natural place to go and buy its products. So I would say a lot of it is economics, a big part of it is policy, there's a lot of infrastructure, but there's also that sense of having pride in being Indian, of supporting your own, of wanting your own companies to come up. That requires a certain, I would say, collective mindset. That's one of the changes which we are trying to bring about. It will be, it will be hard, because, China has today accounts for a very large part of global manufacturing. But I feel today that after COVID, after the disruptions that we speak about, climate, Ukraine, etc., there is a sense in the world that there must be more sources of production. And we are trying to position ourselves and trying to capture that sentiment and tell global companies saying, look, why don't you also look at India? But I have to earn that business. I can't just tell people come to India and not sort of be attractive enough or efficient enough to do that. I think this is today for us one of the big challenges, but certainly it's something we would like to go down that direction. On the net zero and are we being less ambitious? Look, I was with the Prime Minister in Glasgow when he made that commitment. And there was a very, very intense debate we had in the whole run-up to Glasgow. First of all, to ask a society at $2,000 per capita income to even make a commitment is itself a huge ask. I mean, where in the world at $2,000 has a society made that kind of commitment? So I think, we should actually today look at, we should not, you cannot equate India and the timelines of India and the growth path of India with countries whose per capita income are 5 times or 10 times or 20 times what is that of India. I mean, China's per capita income today is 4.5 times ours. And look at where they have pegged it. So now it's possible that, given the enormous pace of technological change, that a lot of these debates may be overtaken by options whose effectiveness we do not know today. I mean, the last 10 years have been a huge surprise for all of us. So maybe the next 10 years would be an even bigger surprise. So, but we felt on balance because it's, when you look at these big global debates, it's important not to be pressurized or, in a sense, pushed to make decisions. We are still very much a nation of small producers. We are very employment sensitive. It's very easy, in Europe, for example, has a very, I would say, almost a theological opposition to coal. But yes, they can have it. Their income levels allow it. They had other sources. I mean, when we were in Glasgow, everybody was against coal because they're all busy importing Russian gas. So, but now when you look at the challenges that they faced, and I am not unsympathetic to the challenges, but you see, when at moments of stress, now a lot of people have fallen back to what they had also discarded earlier. So I don't think we have fallen short. In fact, I feel that under the circumstances, this was actually in fact, it was quite a big commitment which was made. I think it was important to make that commitment because you need to have some target to motivate people. If you had no target at all, it's not in human nature to drive yourself to do that. But I'm very confident, when I see what's happened on the digital side, I'm very confident India will also surprise itself when it comes to green technologies, that we will adapt, we will embrace. In many ways, there will be a kind of leapfrogging of Indian industry and Indian economy in ways in which we may not today fully anticipate it. But there is, people again have reduced it to a kind of a zero emissions issue. I think it's much bigger than that also. It's important. There are lifestyle issues and there are issues, by the way, of keeping promises. One of the problems through the, in this whole climate debate is, every climate conference is like Groundhog Day. The same guys come, make the same promises, and sort of, it's like, so the reality is that the kind of resources which were promised, there's not even a sort of, I don't want to say pretense, but a modicum of delivering on that. Those are also genuine challenges. I think the other two questions or observations in a way are kind of connected. You spoke about how India's or Indians, the standing of Indians has improved. Look, I share this. I first set out of India 44 years ago, 1979. I first came to Europe in 1981. It was a period when our resources were less, our standing was less, maybe our capabilities were less. We have, one part of it is, what we say, things like our economy has grown, etc. But the reality is the perception of India and Indians in the world, that has undergone a big change. That we have developed a kind of a collective sense today of people who embraced education, who embraced technology, who by the way, when I was ambassador in the US, I once had a member of Congress, a very a tough guy from Texas, who's a judge. And he actually told me, he said, I like Indians because I've never seen them on the wrong side of the bench. He was from a legal bench. So look, that Indian who follows the rules, whose work ethic is strong, whose family values are good, this is actually our collective persona. So we are seen today as really contributing citizens, as assets. People don't see us, wherever Indians are, they are not seen as a burden on the society which they are. They are seen actually as an asset. That's why when I said, all you guys make my job that much easier. That it was part of what you're saying. And to the young gentleman there, I would say, look, this is an era of mobility. This is an era of mobility. It will be increasingly one of more and more. I can see a lot of professions where the Indian participation in it will get stronger with the passage of time. Already you can see it. Any of you travel in any airline today, it doesn't have to be an airline owned by India. It is very likely you will see a crew member who's Indian. You go to any hotel in the world today, very likely you will see somebody there who's Indian. So the global service industry, the global tech industry, as I said, look, the demographics work for us. It's our challenge to empower the demographics, make it employable, make it, make that talent and skill deployable, relevant, and that is where people like you come in. And I feel that era where we say, am I at home and is it good to go abroad or bad to go abroad? I think that's old kind of thinking. I think younger people like you are just going to go in and out depending on where the opportunities are. And that's really a different kind of world, to my mind a better kind of world, which all of you are entering. So I count on people like you to take our country forward. I think we'll stop here.